First Global Excellence Seminar hosted by the Institute of International Affairs here at GSIS. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you for taking time out of your days on a Friday, no less, to be here. I hope everybody found the room okay. We had a lot of interest in this seminar, so we had to move to this bigger venue to accommodate everybody, so hopefully there wasn't too much confusion because of that. My name is Ben Engel. I'm a research professor at the IIA, and I'll be hosting this seminar by Dr. CedarBough Saeji. Dr. Saeji is an assistant professor of Korean and East Asian Studies in the Department of Global Studies at Busan National University. She received her PhD in Culture and Performance at the University of California, Los Angeles, and she has a long list of publications that I will be unable to read all here today, but please look at the list that we have provided you, and also look her up on Google Scholar or something similar to view her long list of publications. Today, Dr. Saeji will be presenting a presentation entitled Dressing Up in the Korean Past, an analysis of hanbok wearing as play informed by popular culture. And I think we're all very excited to listen to this presentation, so I will stop there and turn the floor over to Professor Saeji.
Thank you. All right, so my staple fell apart, so let's hope I don't lose the order of the pages. Okay, so in early 2022, when the Beijing Winter Olympics opening ceremony controversially included hanbok, the nationalism on display surrounding Korean traditional clothing was quite clear. The Korean government has designated a list of 100 cultural symbols to be used in outward-facing representations of Korea. This project of strategic essentialism includes the hanbok, of course, because, as visual sociologist Michael Hurt explains, there is no stronger, purer, and unapologetically nationalistically boastful cultural object symbol in Korean culture than the hanbok, Korea's traditional dress. So hanbok has repeatedly been used to reinforce the boundaries of Korean ethnic identity. At the same time that Hallyu, the international success of Korean pop culture, has driven new interest in Korea, a keen observer will also notice that hanbok has become more prominent than ever before. This increased visibility of hanbok can be traced to changing ideas about Korean tradition among Korean youth. So unlike previous generations who grew up under this intense pressure to develop Korea along a westernized model, today's youth, encouraged by the increasing popularity of Korean culture abroad, actually have a different attitude. So it's not surprising that it has grown common to see people in hanbok. The catch is that such visible hanbok are almost always rentals, a colorful and eye-catching phenomena easily spotted in many traditional areas of Korea. So how should we understand this phenomena? In this article, which, it'll be an article eventually, I explain why hanbok rental is much more than a person exchanging money for a chance to wear a different set of clothing. In 2023, many people, especially non-Koreans, encounter hanbok primarily through their consumption of media. So Korean historical dramas, saguk, Korean popular music, and even casual scrolling through social media uploads of members of online communities reveal hanbok in different settings and on different bodies. So when someone rents hanbok, they do so in the context of this world of images. Yep, definitely getting screwed up. Okay. So many of the hanbok renters today are international visitors who've been drawn to Korea by Hallyu. Before Hallyu 1.0 took off in approximately 2000, there was no significant tourism industry in Korea. But right now, we're in the era of Hallyu 2.0, and Hallyu tourism has become the main incentive for trips to Korea. And the tourism industry in Korea has matured, and it has stayed closely linked to this image of Korea that is communicated through popular culture, because that's the driving force of most of the visitors to Korea. And that includes stars in hanbok. So in this article, I'm discussing the wearing of hanbok in two different ways. So first, I'm conceiving of it as a citational practice. So, quote, citational practices connect temporalities, joining past, present, and future discourses, documents, and performance practices, end quote. In our contemporary society, the official, formally produced media texts like television programs or Korean tourism advertisements and K-pop videos, those media texts get spread even further through the practices of social media. So in the same way that I cite this work by Jane Goodman, Citational Practices, joining my ideas to hers, through the wearing of hanbok, the wearer is forging a connection between the Korean past and the Korean present, between Korean things and maybe a non-Korean body. So a complex web of citations is being created among appearances of this clothing within a K-pop music video, on the bodies of top stars, at a Korean ceremony, in the tourism context, or even in this room while I present to you. Second, following on the work of Dinopol and Gretzel, who argue that the tourist selfie is a symbol of a changing tourist gaze, I show that hanbok, combined with photos of the self in hanbok, has become a practice of capturing a sight within the person experiencing it. So therefore, I argue that people who rent a hanbok to visit a touristic spot are creating citational links with the Korean past and with media texts, and embodying those links through the practice of wearing the clothing and sharing the experience in photos on social media. So although hanbok is one of the most visually prominent of a limited number of circulating icons of tradition, mediatized images of hanbok are meant not to portray Korea in its complexity, but traditional Korea as a symbol of national pride and as a domestic and international tourist destination. So in fact, renters' practices of hanbok wearing imbue the hanbok with complexity and playfulness and contextual sensitivity. Therefore, in this article, I examine changing ideas about hanbok that are shaped and informed by the mediatization of hanbok and the growing international popularity of Korea as a tourist destination. To carry out this research, I combined renting hanbok 2 times with reading previous studies on tourism and on hanbok, and an extensive survey of K-pop fans with over 900 fans surveyed in English, Indonesian, Brazilian Portuguese, Chinese, and Korean. And a major section of that survey was talking directly about hanbok. So, clothing has always been a very important way that people signal others. You know, during the Japanese colonial era, people were making a decision to either wear hanbok or more westernized clothing to foreground their association with Korea or to gesture at their modernity. as you can see in these examples. In the 1950s and 1960s, singers like Lee Nan-young took to wearing hanbok on the stage. In the 60s and 70s, as trot songs could be banned for being waisek, for being too Japanese, the trot artists like Lee Nan-young wore hanbok to demonstrate their Koreanness. Similarly, in the modern era, we have K-pop stars who might strategically utilize hanbok and other Korean items, particularly around the time of national holidays, to signal a connection with Koreanness, to signal a connection with their past. So when Lee Nan-young was a star, all the women in middle-class families and their children typically owned hanbok. And they wore it, particularly for important events and holidays. But from about the 1970s to the present, wearing hanbok has grown more and more unusual. Many people only wear it as the mother of the bride at a wedding or the bride in a payback ceremony. Folklorist Ju Do-kyung, studying youth who wear hanbok, found that hanbok has been experienced as an exotic culture among the young generation. This phenomena indicates how alienated tradition has become from everyday life, end quote. However, the emergence of rental hanbok changed hanbok wearing practices, particularly among Koreans. And so, of course, there's always been rental hanbok shops. Like these are some, shops in my neighborhood that they will rent a hanbok if you are the mother of the bride or whatever it is. Of course, there have always been rental hanbok shops, but with the 1997 Asian financial crisis, then many hanbok shops increased their rental business because selling people expensive items of clothing was less profitable than staying afloat through rental services. So today, many of the elaborate, beautiful hanbok that you can see at events are actually rentals. So as Hallyu tourism began to emerge in the early 2000s, hanbok rental shops became more and more common in touristic historic sites. Now, all of us who were in Korea back in the 1990s can remember going to the palace and there was like an actual guy with a film camera who would take a photo of you in, there was like maybe 10 outfits, and you could like put one on and you could come back in an hour and they would have the photo for you. And that was great, but the current practice, of course, is connected to the fact that we all have a cell phone. We can take the photos for ourselves. We can do it our own way, and we can walk around while we're doing it. We don't have to be stuck in the one place where there's that one guy with the 10 outfits. So renting hanbok, not to wear at a wedding or an important birthday, but to take photos with friends, has become the primary rental market. The existence of rental experiences and also social clubs for wearing hanbok pushes back against ingrained ideas about tradition, encouraging Korean youth both to take pride in traditional dress and making hanbok wearing kind of fun. Koreans who wear hanbok are often joining overseas fans in renting hanbok as a way to play in a historic area, as a temporary embodiment of tradition, and as a citational practice linked to beloved media texts. So this activity, of course, is further encouraged by government-run historic sites that provide free entry for anybody in a hanbok. So in pre-modern Korea, commoners generally wore hanbok made out of cotton, or in summer, hemp or rami. The luxurious hanbok that serves as the representative image today is based on silk, court, and elite hanbok. However, like all items of clothing, hanbok has continually changed through Korean history. So in contemporary Korea, designers create what is called senghwal hanbok or gaeryang hanbok. like we can see in these images. Now, these terms often refer to maybe a simpler cut, like this is gedan hanbok, or adjustments to hanbok that make it trendier. At times, the connection in gedan hanbok to hanbok itself can become tenuous. You can see an outfit that only preserves, for example, the classic neckline, and then below that it becomes quite different from a conventional hanbok. So gedan hanbok continues to be quite popular with people who work in customer-facing businesses that are associated with tradition. So you'll see a lot of gedan hanbok on people who are in galleries, in folk villages, in artistic workshops, and once in a while the government has everybody in the post office wear it around the time of the holidays too. So gedan hanbok was really adopted by people who wanted to gesture towards Korean tradition, but they also wanted to show a fresh approach. So like what we can see in these clothes is, a fresh approach. They're not saying this is traditional. They're trying to be, trendy and unique. So hanbok is a living culture. The requirements of the pre-modern era, do you guys realize in the pre-modern era that the color of the trim could be indicating if you were married or not, if you had a son or not? I mean, that kind of thing, you had to wear the right color of trim. That kind of idea of hanbok wearing so constrained by rules is completely foreign to Koreans today. And nobody wants to wear hanbok in that sort of way. It's a living culture. People are making this, gedan hanbok, and it can be so incredibly fun. But gedan hanbok is modernized in ways that we can all identify. When we look at gedan hanbok, oh, this is not traditional. You know it. But the problem might be that a lot of these tourist rental hanboks they're more, how shall I say it? For one thing, they call it fusion hanbok, but it's more removed from pre-modern dress norms than many people think. And a lot of foreign tourists to Korea who may wear this fusion hanbok, they may not realize just how far it has strayed away from a traditional hanbok. When we see the fusion hanbok, we often see something that has more of an empire waist. We have a tighter fit somewhere in here to emphasize that a woman is not, currently expecting a child. Basically it preserves the lines of a woman's body. She can still be cute. And in a way, that's very far removed from traditional hanbok ideas of, back in the day, it was sexy to be like, I have socks. So, you want to see my ankle? So that was sexy back in the day. It's so different than today, where we see all of these people continually wearing hanbok that preserve the lines of their body, that still show off, their body. So, but the thing is that shift is also happening in Saguk dramas. So when we watch dramas and we assume that this traditional historical drama is of course they are consulting somebody, of course it's all perfect and traditional. But many times the same changes are happening to emphasize the beauty of a star that might cost them $100,000 per episode. If that star costs $100,000 per episode, they're not going to hide her face all the time, every time she leaves the house, the way a traditional upper-class woman would have hidden her face. And they're going to show off how sexy she actually is. Because she's worth $100,000 per episode, and it's not just about the face, right? So, anyway, it makes it hard for people to realize actually how ahistoric a lot of these changes are. So regardless of whether the style of the hanbok is traditional or not, the thing is that a visitor to Korea who rents a hanbok, they still get to embody Koreanness. Because, as Michael Hurt again explains, hanbok is associated with Korean faces. Korean bodies, and is a marker of many other things Korean. So in July of 2022, I rented hanbok twice. I visited a lot of shops with my husband and with dance scholar Chae Hae-ri. And when I went with my husband, we pretended that I couldn't speak in Korean, and he was walking first. He was trying to speak to them in Chinese. We wanted to see how they dealt with a Chinese speaker. When I went with Dr. Chae, I again was only an English speaker, and she was like introducing me. We were trying to see like, how do they educate the person who came in and says, I want to wear a traditional hanbok? Like, what would they try to urge you to wear? So it was a really interesting experience, embodying hanbok and then walking around in the palace. So Gyeongbokgung once and Cheongdeokgung once. It was like as soon as you put on the hanbok and you went inside of the palace, the hanbok dictated your movements. Like, a lot of you guys know me, and you can even see right now I'm a little bit hyper. But as soon as I'm wearing these gigantic skirts, then my habitually very long steps get shorter, and my body language became more demure and feminine. And my husband, who's not even a big watcher of like historic dramas or anything, he started unprompted to adopt these poses like a yangban, you know. You know, maybe contemplating philosophy. And what was even stranger is that we also, very uncharacteristically, started citing the social mediatization that you see, where you see other people dressing up and going to the palace, and you see the finger hearts coming out. And I've never seen my husband do finger hearts before. So the actual practice of wearing the hanbok came into our bodies and informed how we should walk, how we should stand, how we should look. And while taking photos, how we should pose. So it was really incredibly interesting experience, especially because I habitually wear hanbok anyway. So didn't really expect that. So while a lot of hanbok aficionados, they look at Gaerang hanbok and they say, oh, you know, that's knowledgeable stylistic changes. But what rental shops call these fusion hanbok, they're often seemingly designed to evoke an image kind of like of a Disney princess. They're often made from polyester and other artificial fabrics. And fusion hanbok can include embroidery, sequins, lace, decorative layers, fabric dyed with a color fade, and other ornate elements, or even several of those elements in combination. So when I went with Dr. Chae Hae-ri, I again ended up renting a hanbok with only kind of modest fusion influences. But Dr. Choi, who is a dance scholar and owns probably a dozen very expensive, very fancy hanbok, actually chose to wear one of the most gaudy ones, unlike the ones she had in her own closet. Because it was play, it was fun. She could take it as a chance to try something new. So it's really interesting the way today Korea Incorporated is co-creating itself as this tourism destination and co-creating wearing hanbok as a tourist activity in a way that I hope will avoid Disneyification through participation. But the increase in visibility of hanbok in Korean media and the corresponding rise in the hanbok tourism rental market can also be considered a process of self-commodification. So one concern that has been raised by scholars of hanbok is that rental hanbok actually could have a chilling effect on the purchase of hanbok. So Go Soon-hwa and other scholars showed that a rental experience could actually dull interest in buying hanbok because it demonstrated that hanbok was uncomfortable, which is partially uncomfortable because tourist hanbok is cheap. You know, this is not uncomfortable, okay? Another study by E.J. Young showed that hanbok rentals could have a negative impact on public perception of hanbok because of low quality and gaudy design elements. So it's not all a positive thing, but if renting hanbok is a citational practice, I need to explain to you guys a little bit about what it's citing. So the answer obviously begins with images of Korean celebrities. So the tourist gaze, at one time the tourist gaze was constructed with guidebooks and tourism professionals, like actual guides that took you around and they told you what to look at and what to think about it. But these days, the tourist gaze has become more and more intertwined with media images, to the point where people come to Korea to reproduce, to follow in the footsteps of certain images they've already seen in popular TV shows or places that they've seen their favorite stars taking photos. So global tourists who rent hanbok they've already seen hanbok embedded within the same media that told them to visit Korea. Literal tourism advertisements for Korea place top Korean stars in hanbok and instruct the viewer to visit Korea. So the presence of hanbok in media formats, often in completely unremarked upon ways, demonstrates that hanbok remains part of Korea. And of course, the government loves that. So, historical dramas, of course, were once something that was watched by primarily an older audience, but as we've seen more and more of the K-pop stars and other Hallyu stars appearing in historical dramas, then we've seen that the audience for historical dramas has become younger. And we have seen the various government institutions, like the Hanbok Jinhung Center, the Hanbok Promotion Center, really capitalize on this and try to make this image that we are not just having a Hallyu wave, but a hanbok wave, where they create these very trendy events like having Hanbok Wave Digital Runway funded by the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, the Hanbok Promotion Center, Korea Craft Design Culture Promotion Agency, Korea International Cultural Exchange Agency, and they go out and they recruit top stars to actually wear hanbok. So, now, in my previous publications, I've talked about hanbok already, and I trace a lot of the mediatization of tradition in K-pop to a turning point of Binjino's January from 2016. After this video came out, a bunch of different Korean artists began to incorporate traditional imagery into their promotions. Some people trace okay, come on, play. Some people trace it to other videos, but this video is arguably one of the most important ones. I'm not voting, sorry. Okay, sorry. So to illustrate how celebrities embody hanbok and actually create an opening for fans to put on the clothing as well, there's no better example than this video. I mean, the hanbok they're wearing really looks like something you could rent near Gyeongbokgung, right? So this song from Momoland is a follow-up to their 6 months earlier hit song Boom Boom, which was also like a huge cover dance hit. And this is really made for participation. It's made for embodiment. It's made for the audience to get involved. And true to their very fun and approachable reputation, Momoland are dressing up in the clothing of the foreign viewer while inviting fans to dress up and dance in theirs, in hanbok. So therefore, I assert that Momoland is not only inviting friends to dance along, but to dress along as well. So instead of showing hanbok as like serious or unapproachable, they relate it to the beautiful traditional costumes in other countries. And the music video was actually the 9th most viewed K-pop video of 2018, and it was popularly covered around the world. Okay, so I'm not actually planning to go into the topic of cultural appropriation in any depth because I was worried that I would run out of time. But we can talk about it in question and answer if you want to. So a lot of what I asked fans about in my in the survey was about cultural appropriation and asking them if they thought that wearing hanbok was cultural appropriation and if they felt comfortable, because you probably know in a lot of Western countries that's become like a very large discourse and it creates like a hesitancy to wear traditional clothing from other countries. And so I did approach that with fans, and I have some pretty interesting interview answers from them. But what was also really interesting was seeing how the Korean respondents to the Korean version of the video answered. And of course, I can't figure out where that is. Must be here. Koreans, of course, were unconcerned about cultural appropriation because, you know, it's natural to Koreans that other people would wear hanbok. But, I mean, they create these rental companies. The Koreans rent the hanbok to make money, and then Korean government allows you to go into the palace for free if you're wearing hanbok. So obviously, Koreans are fine with it. But a lot of the Korean respondents talked about the need for more education so that fans and other renters would know that what they're renting is actually fusion hanbok, and, you know, to know more about the history of hanbok. And I've since discovered that there's like entire educational programs in Japan where people can spend like, you know, a couple of weeks learning about kimono, and they can get like a certificate. And, you know, and meanwhile in Korea, there isn't even like a 2-hour course that you could take, you know, offered somewhere near the palace zone, you know, that somebody could learn more about hanbok before they went out wearing it. So, but what really is happening a lot for Koreans when they're wearing hanbok is that dressing up in hanbok is becoming a form of play. Like, obviously, if you are the mother of the bride, it's not play. But if you're dressing up and you're, you know, going out to take photos and uploading it to Instagram, then this is play. And as we should all know, there are also these clubs where young Koreans will get together and do all the fun things that you do with your friends ordinarily, except for wearing hanbok. Let's go to the coffee shop. Let's go to the movies. And this encourages a more normalized attitude towards the traditional clothing and associates it with fun. So young Koreans obviously appreciate design modifications. You know, things like this jogori sell much better for younger people than, you know, something that's dry clean only. they are actually getting into, there's a whole subculture right now with hanbok wearing in Korea that's getting into hanbok as like fashion. And there are some prominent designers who are coming up who are creating these very interesting designs with hanbok, and you see people actually taking a very different attitude towards it than in the past. The appreciation of hanbok has grown exponentially. So, but we also see Koreans just dressing up in the rental hanbok and going to the palace as well. So what's going on with that? Well, part of it is when I actually talk to people at the palace who look Korean and they're dressed up in hanbok, and and they say, well, yeah, I asked them, have you been to the palace before? Oh yeah. Well, why are you coming today? To have fun, to take photos. The act of wearing hanbok and taking photos with their friends in the palace brings them back to the location that previously was some school trip that maybe they didn't want to go on. That maybe they were being dragged along, they were bored. But now, through this process of wearing hanbok in the palace, it becomes a place that they can enjoy. It becomes something they can see with new eyes, right? They're spending money for an experience just like the foreign tourists who come there and do the same thing, right? So this practice has become increasingly normalized, even made trendy by these fashion-forward youth who upload the photos on Instagram. And some of these Korean people who are uploading photos on Instagram, oh my God, they rent hanbok they must be hidden in the back of the rental shops because these are amazing. Everything, the full hair pieces and stuff, Ooh. Anyway, so just as foreigners are connecting to hanbok because it's the clothing that was worn by their favorite singer or their favorite actor, Koreans who have a deeper knowledge of hanbok can be following hanbok as a fashion. They can be following this in a much more complex manner. So every time we see a hanbok, it's really deeply embedded with meanings, and it's embedded with different meanings according to who that wearer is, and according to whether that's a rental hanbok, and according to whether or not they own it, and all of that. So for a Korean or a resident in Korea, those meanings can come from the experience of wearing hanbok on a major holiday when you were a kid, or seeing family members put on hanbok for an important birthday or an important wedding, or witnessing traditional performances with the performers clad in hanbok. But for both Koreans and non-Koreans, hanbok is these days most often encountered in these media texts. I mean, unless, of course, you live around Gyeongbokgung, in which case, maybe not. But I mean, for those of us who live in Busan, or for people who live in foreign countries, the most often way to see hanbok is these kind of photos that we might see in the context of a music video, or we might see uploaded and shared again and again and again on social media. So, as both Koreans and non-Koreans see hanbok more often in positive, fun, happy atmospheres like the BAM video or these performative contexts, then their feeling of pride, if they're Korean, or interest, if they're non-Korean, is likely to increase. And the efforts of the Korean government to promote Korean things and Korean symbols, combined with these other mediatized encounters, represent complex citational practices. So through these practices, meaning in one context can be recontextualized and applied to another context. So, tourism scholar Bak Hyung-yu has written about the Korean government's eagerness to promote heritage tourism, because heritage can make a constructive contribution to strengthening place-based identities and enhancing clear sociocultural linkages with the nation's past. What Bak's research teaches us is that visiting the palace was not just about learning when a building was built, or how big it is, or who may have lived in that building at one time, but it has an important role to play in building an identity as Koreans. And so going to the palace and encountering foreigners dressed up in hanbok in the palace is quite significant, because at the same time that you are experiencing the palace as being something of yours, you're seeing the fascination, the interest of other people who have gone to the effort to spend the money to change their clothes and come to the palace, to enjoy the palace, to engage with Korean tradition on a deeper level. So I mean, just imagine you see the tourist following the person with a flag, and everybody's just kind of like walking along like ducks, and it's not actually, you don't know if they enjoy themselves. But when you see this tourist, you know she's having a great time. So like as a Korean person seeing this is reflecting to you something positive about your own culture. And so what I'm actually seeing with this is that hanbok as a symbol of Korea is reclaiming some of the ground that was lost when Koreans thought that like class and success was associated with Western things. You know, in this era with like BTS and Parasite, Koreans are seeing their culture being reflected in the shining eyes of the international Hallyu fan, and this experience has spurred a reassessment of Korean things. So this has been called a yaksuip, a re-importation effect by some scholars, and it's, you know, Koreans look at they reassess something after they see that people abroad love it. I mean, this happened for BTS, right? BTS is a classic example of yaksuip effect, that they didn't take off in Korea first, they took off internationally first. And then Koreans reassessed BTS as a group. Or we can say we're seeing a reassessment of Korean culture, Korean traditional culture in general, in this era where Korean culture is able to win on the international stage. So it's become increasingly easy to spot hanbok on the urban streets of Korea, not just because of tourist rentals, but because actually there's a shifting relationship that the Korean MZ generation has with Korean traditions. Because when I first moved to Korea in the 1990s, like Koreans who were young, who were then my age, like I was young in the 90s, so Koreans who were young, they had a very different relationship with Korean traditions than the MZ generation today. Because like my age Koreans, their parents will tell them, you're doing it wrong. You're wearing hanbok wrong. Oh, you shouldn't wear like that. Like you're doing tradition wrong. But my age Koreans now have kids. And my age cannot tell their kids you're doing it wrong. They're just like, oh, you like Korean things? Oh, great. Right? So we have this very different relationship with Korean tradition because the MZ generation can just do it without being told by other people that they don't understand it, that they aren't doing it right. And so they're doing it in their own way. They're enjoying it in the way that they want to enjoy Korean culture, not as a reminder of a previous generation's values, but to suit their own desires, including their desire to take pride in being Korean. So this mediatization of hanbok on actors' bodies in historic dramas or K-pop idols' bodies on stage is both a reflection of this changed attitude, and it's also an accelerant. Like, you know, fires have accelerants. An accelerant that has driven the desire to wear hanbok both within and beyond Korea. So hanbok is Korean, but I hope I've convinced you in this presentation that its current visibility is part of this complicated web of citational references that extends far beyond Korea and beyond Korean bodies.
Found like a lot of food for thought, and as my background is in theater, of course I was sort of drawn in by play. But what I wanted to ask, I mean, I think you never mentioned the word costume or cosplay for that matter. I wonder, isn't whether it's for the wedding hall or to have fun at the palace, isn't the hanbok although it's quite different and the one is maybe more fun than the other, isn't it in both cases in a way a costume that's temporary, that can be rented and doesn't have to be owned, and in a way, like, won't it always be a costume when used for play in this way?
Yeah, I'm still debating if I should use the word costume, because costume gets into this loaded territory of cultural appropriation, because costume becomes the foreign that you don't take seriously. Like in the context of theater, like yes, that's serious, that costume is serious. But in the context of play, when we hear the word costume, you think about being a kid and putting on these things that you didn't necessarily respect. And I did hear in the interviews, in the survey interviews, a lot of people saying, I felt that it was fine to wear hanbok as long as I respected the clothing that I was wearing, as long as I acted respectfully while I was wearing. Or in the future when I go to Korea, I plan to wear hanbok, but it's important to me that I do it respectfully. So when I was asking people about cultural appropriation, they were responding with words that to me sound like I don't want to seem like I'm dressing up in a costume. I want to seem like I'm having a cultural experience and learning more deeply through embodiment. So that's why I've avoided using the word costume so far. And I might need to actually discuss it briefly in the paper, in the written one, just to explain to the audience, like, why do I not want to use the word costume? I don't think I want to use the word costume because I think that you don't see people putting on these rental hanbok and acting like fools. Like you see them walking around and taking photos of themselves trying to look nice with beautiful backdrops. You know, you don't actually see people being disrespectful of Korean tradition. And that is a really important part of this process. You know, it's when we rented hanbok, they didn't say like, be careful with these clothes. like they didn't say anything like that. So, but at the same time, I've never seen somebody do something in the hanbok that seemed likely to damage it, like, or intentionally disrespectful. So, yeah, I guess costume is kind of a loaded word, and I should probably be explicit about why I want to stay away from it. Yeah. Did that answer the question? I'm so bad with answering questions. I'm always just like, my brain just goes off in some place. And
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to use my prerogative as the moderator then to ask a question. It kind of piggyback off this question. I was wondering if you could, one, give us some sense from your interviews how wearing the hanbok and getting interested in Korean culture via K-pop or K-dramas or what have it be, and then you come to Korea and you do dress up and visit these places. How does that open the door to learning more about wider things about Korea, whether it be history, about the places that they're visiting? How much of that is leading to interest or curiosity about other things about Korea, apart from what could possibly be the gateway in terms of these popular culture? And then second, and I think this dovetails from that question, is what does this say about, like, you use the word wave several times in your presentation. We all use it, right? Korean wave, hanbok wave. But the thing about waves is they eventually crash into the shore, right? And dissipate and disappear. So how does, whether it's about hanbok or Korean culture, Korean society or the government have to start thinking about maybe not making this a wave, but something that's more perpetual and lasts longer and doesn't turn into something like Hong Kong movies in the 1980s, J-pop in the 90s, with these other waves that eventually disappear. And then for us as Korean studies scholars, right, now we're talking Japanese studies, we're in this sort of crisis type of thing. Nobody's interested in this stuff anymore. Similar things are happening with Chinese studies, I think, these days. So from that kind of disciplinary type of perspective, how do we have to start thinking about the future of a Korean wave or a world without a wave anymore?
Well, I only use the word Korean wave because they used hanbok wave. In my own writing, I never call it Korean wave. I always call it Hallyu, and I define Hallyu for the reader, and that's it. Because I don't believe it's a wave. I don't believe it's going to crash and dissipate. And the way that I always answer this for people when they ask me, like, isn't this just a passing fad? Isn't it just going to go away eventually? Is, I tried Thai food for the first time when I went off to college. Okay, I'm from a really small town, like we don't have restaurants. Okay, so I tried Thai food for the first time when I went off to college, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm gonna eat this stuff as often as I can for the rest of my life. And you know what, I still eat Thai food. So I don't think that we can think of Hallyu in the way that it's being consumed internationally as something that people are just gonna one day say like, oh, I don't wanna eat Thai food anymore. Like if you like Thai food, you just keep liking Thai food. If K-dramas all of a sudden stop having good storytelling and stop having good character development, then maybe people stop watching it. If K-pop gets boring, like maybe people will stop watching it. But as long as it continues to like be K-pop or be K-drama or be Thai food, then why would people stop? So I don't believe in the wave. And I don't believe in it disappearing. I think that the interest in Korea, in Korean studies, in Korean things is, at the worst, it will continue with the people who got turned on now. Kind of like, in America, how you can like listen to those radio stations that play like nothing but classic rock. And like there's still somebody who listens to it, otherwise they would stop the program, right? Like people have been listening to classic rock since classic rock came out, and they're still listening to it, and they're not putting new songs in that playlist. So I do think that Korean studies and K-pop and K-dramas can be like classic rock. And do young people today start listening to classic rock and say, I want to listen to that station all the time? I don't necessarily think so.
They wear Nirvana shirts and think it's a clothing brand, right?
Yeah, exactly. But Nirvana's grunge, not classic. Anyway, I'm from Seattle. You have to be careful with that. Okay, so like I honestly think that the young people who've gotten fascinated with Korean pop culture today are just going to stick with it, and that's going to be their equivalent of classic rock. As they get older, they will continue to be listening to K-pop or things that sound similar to K-pop and strike the same chord with them. I mean, it's not like I listen to exclusively K-pop, but if it still is giving you this great thing, why would you stop? And I think that Korean studies still has room to grow because there are still new people getting interested in Korea and wanting to know more about it. And I do think that when you come to Korea and you put on hanbok, sometimes you put it on and that's enough. And you're like, I never want to put it on again. It was scratchy and I was sweating. Okay, so that happens. But I think that for other people, that it makes you start on some voyage of discovery. Because when I interview like Korean traditional performing artists and I ask them, how did you get involved in Korean traditional performing arts? There are two answers. The one answer is just their family did traditional performing arts. They've known it forever. The other answer is one time they saw a performance and it changed their life. And they went home, and this one young man, he tells me, the drum beats echoed inside of my body for weeks after I saw it. And I wouldn't stop bothering my parents to find me a way to learn Korean traditional percussion. And so in the same way, there are many people that will try hanbok once and that's enough for them. But there's somebody who's going to go home and it's going to make them start learning more. And it's going to make them get deeper into it. And it might not exactly be about hanbok. It might be about their own traditional clothes in their own country. And they start thinking about people wearing traditional clothing and preserving heritage. But yeah, I think it is important. I think that being exposed to stuff is important. And the fact that even if it's scratchy and hot and polyester and has a dumbass bow on the back, I still think that it can make somebody think in a new way. It can introduce them to something new. So I think it's great. Yeah.
We have time for one more question if there's one out there. Otherwise, I will call an end to the session. So please join me in giving Dr. Saeji a warm round of applause for a great presentation. And we have a tradition here that we present our ES presenters.